Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, if that happens to be where you are. My name is Mitchell Stevens. I am dialing in from Stanford, California, where I am a convener of the Learning Society Project. We'll have a link to the Learning Society Project in the chat in just a moment. You may well be here because you joined us 2 weeks ago for the launch of that project. And this commences a series that will run at least through the fall called Learning Society Forum. And the purpose of this hour every 2 weeks is to go a little deeper on some of the insights that contributed to the Learning Society thesis, and also to do what we could to create a community of dialogue. There's so much activity happening in the future of work and learning space, but remarkably few opportunities we think to gather around a table, literal or virtual, and have an ongoing dialogue about some of these issues. And so we wanted to take what opportunity we could to open up that kind of space. Um, uh, in an ideal world, an ideal Zoom world, we might have all of your smiling faces on the screen as well. But legal departments being what they are, and because we want to post these discussions to the world subsequently, rather than having all of you sign release documents, we're going to keep this little wall between the speakers and you guys up. However, we have opened both the Q&A channel and the chat channel to all of you. So, and our speakers today, Richard Setterston and Gloria Mawasi, will not be paying attention to those while they're speaking, but I will be keeping a close eye and also serving as moderator. So delighted that you're here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. In the interest of maintaining the most of our time for presentation and dialogue, I'm going to dispense with introductions to Rick and Gloria. You either know them or you can find out who they are quite easily. Both were participants in the Learning Society Futures Forum last year, and helped to generate the ideas therein. Uh, Rick from Oregon State University is dialing in from Germany. So, by virtue of the various layers of technology, you might find that his slides are just a little blurry. We can still read them here in the United States and hope that you can too. But please bear with us on that. Rick's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to Gloria to provide some commentary. The three of us, Rick, Gloria, and Mitchell, will be in a little bit of dialogue. And then we're going to open it up to all of you before the hour closes. So thanks for joining. And Rick, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. And yeah, my apologies if the slides are a little blurry. We're a little technically challenged here this evening. Thanks, Mitchell, and good day to everyone wherever you are. I'm coming to today from Bremen, Germany. It's a pleasure to be a Futures Fellow, and it's a pleasure to help launch a series of conversations around our new report, Building a Learning Society, and folks can learn about it on our website, learningsociety.io. A few points to set the stage for the conversation today. Longer lives bring new and urgent demands for the future of work, for labor force participation, for economic mobility, and for care work. And meeting these challenges means creating accessible, ongoing opportunities for learning and training at every age. Modern life paths are increasingly nonlinear. They're marked by repeated transitions between education, work, caregiving, and personal development. And these paths bring new risks and uncertainties for individuals and families, but they they're needed because a learning society requires a more flexible life course. And so our goal today is to really begin exploring how longevity societies might evolve into learning societies, strengthen life transitions, and also rethink how we organize the life course and the experience of life itself. In the report, we highlight 2 grand imperatives and 9 design principles that really shape our vision for the future. So let me quickly reiterate those today as they're important context for the conversation we'd like to have. The 2 big imperatives are quite simply, 1, to equip Americans for the future of work. This is about making major investments in workforce talent across the life course. Americans must prepare for ongoing adaptation, retraining, and new roles in the face of technological change. And we need only think about how much AI, for example, is transforming every sector. Also, it's about enabling opportunity. This is obviously about how to expand economic mobility. It requires rethinking how education, employment, and care are organized and rewarded. And this is essential to any vision of shared prosperity. Now, we don't have all the answers, but it is a call to vision building, and it will be a collective enterprise, and we're eager to get that conversation going. These are the 9 design principles we talk about in the report, and there are going to be 3 here that I've highlighted that are kind of crucial for the conversation today. One is for designing for change across longer lives. One is about building an infrastructure for caring, and one is about designing for transitions. We'll say more about those as we make our way. First, what do I mean by the term life course? Life course is a way of understanding how people grow up and how people grow older, and how those pathways and the transitions and events that mark them are shaped by people's social, cultural, and historical context. In a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. And Dale Danifer and I have talked about 2 approaches to the life course. One we call a personological approach. So that's an approach where you're tracing individual lives as they unfold over time. And you're especially trying to connect early experiences with later ones. And so for learning, we might be interested in understanding the connection between, say, early educational attainment and any number of outcomes in later life, not just jobs, salaries, or benefits, which are typical to look at, but connections between educational attainment and, say, partnering or parenting or relationships and social networks or health or civic engagement. Those are all things that are plausibly and importantly tied to early educational experience. A second approach is what we call an institutional approach. And this is an approach that really focuses in on how social forces structure the life course and open and close opportunities. And so here we might be looking at things like the family realm, education, work, government, policies, historical events, and periods of social change. In the case of learning, for example, we might, examples might be, say, the GI Bill for veterans, policies related to student loans or work study. We might look at how demography affects the composition and the competition or flow of students through schools. We might look at how family resources matter with respect to learning outcomes, or how parenting strategies might cultivate a sense of an appreciation for learning. So both of these approaches to understanding the life course are really important in building a learning society. What I want to a message I want to reinforce before we move forward is this basic idea. The entire notion of a life course is a 20th century construct. It was made possible by revolutionary changes in the last century. Declines in mortality and morbidity and fertility, the emergence of welfare states, the evolution of higher and expansion of higher education, gross increases actually in the standard of living. All of these in the last century brought great predictability to human life. And in the post-World War II decades, the degree of stability that had emerged was described by Bernice Newgarden, a psychologist, as constituting a normal, expectable life. That's an important phrase, a normal, expectable life. It was a script for life that ran on predictable rhythms. It was reinforced through a set of social expectations. People use the ideas about the normal, expectable life to measure their own lives and to measure the lives of others. You knew, for example, whether you were on time for a particular life transition or off time, maybe early or late with respect to accomplishing a particular transition, or maybe you'd run out of time with respect to key life transitions. So many things that we take for granted about the life course today were not possible at the turn of the last century. The century swung from really having very little predictability to being faced in a way with a life course that in comparison had very little flexibility. It brought penalties for deviating from it on top of it. So let me say just a little bit about that story. Over the 20th century, the domains of education, work, and family moved out of the household and became separate spheres. This is an important part of this story. This shift, which is shown in lots of research, and I'm thinking here about research by Uli Meyer, by Martin Coley, by Glenn Elder, Lisa Pearson, me, and others. This shift fundamentally changed how we live and organize our lives. And one only need look as far back as the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic to realize just how deeply entrenched this separation of life spheres had become as we swung back in so many ways to an earlier model. That is, in those early days of the pandemic, after more than a century of institutional separation, households became unhinged in their new togetherness and by the reintegration of responsibilities of education, work, and family back into a common space, the household. And part of what made COVID-19 so difficult is that it shook some of the fundamental assumptions that we learned in the last century about the predictability of human life. The pandemic in some ways reminded us of a world we forgot, of a time not so long ago when long and relatively healthy lives, even life itself, could not be taken for granted. And again, in most Western nations, the long arc of the last century brought truly extraordinary gains in human welfare and predictability. So it's not just that life domains were spatially separated. With this spatial separation, the 20th century also saw the emergence of a kind of compartmentalized life with roles and responsibilities that were mapped onto distinct periods of life. Again, the normal expectable life. This is a key part of the increased welfare and predictability that emerged in the last century. What Martin Coley once called the tripartition of the life course, a phrase I've used here on this slide, or what Matilda White Riley called the age-differentiated model, it splits life into three basic boxes: education and training early in life, work, often full-time continuous work in the middle, and retirement or leisure at the end. This model is work-centered. It's traditionally male-oriented, and it's age-based. And so I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a moment. The family realm, of course, you can see exists across the life course, but of course the nature of family roles, responsibilities, and experiences also changes as people grow older. Across the century, a complex set of institutions and policies were built around and reinforced this tripartite structure. It brought predictability and stability again, but it also brought rigidity. And over time, this model has been described as being institutionalized or standardized. But of course, we also know that lots of fault lines have emerged. Deep inequalities mean that some groups in our population have never had access to this model to begin with. And new forms of precarity have appeared within and between these boxes. Let me highlight just a couple. Of course, in the first box, the education box, it's now longer. I mean, more people are striving for post-secondary degrees, spending more time in school, delaying work, postponing partnering and parenting. In the middle of life, work-family dynamics are strained by divorce, by dual careers, by child and elder care, by short-term jobs, by relocations, by technological advances that require retooling. And in later life, well, later life is less predictable as well in some ways. Many can't afford to retire at traditional ages. Others don't want to retire. Still others, retirement for them becomes a long or gradual process that involves what we call bridge jobs or intermittent work. And events like the pandemic or the Great Recession before it forced some to work longer, and others have also retired earlier or left jobs, say in the period we talk about as the Great Resignation. A key point with respect to old age is that planning for the end of life is difficult now, as people don't know whether they will live 5 or 25 years. And for some, it's hard to know how much of life will be left at the end of the money. As life expectancy grew, so did the number of recognized life phases. From childhood and adulthood to adolescence being recognized early in the last century, and later middle age and old age. Childhood was further split into early childhood, middle childhood. Young adulthood came into view and was separated from adolescence, and and old age was further split into what gerontologists have called the young old and the old, or the third or the fourth ages. In that fourth age, at the very latest part, we now talk regularly about the oldest old. And some years ago, I said it would not be surprising to see people begin to split the early adult years into the young and the old young. And lo and behold, at a conference recently, I heard someone describe in their analyses, they use these terms to reflect the fact that the front and the back ends of the 20s in particular are quite different, qualitatively different experiences. Yeah, of course, it's also common to talk about emerging adulthood today as the front part of that period. The point is that these distinctions both reflect and shape expectations for what's supposed to happen in these different periods of life, and what individuals can expect to happen, what's supposed to happen, what they can expect to happen in each phase. So there's a kind of tension here. On the one hand, over the course of the last century, age became increasingly salient as a dimension of social life. You see here in this slide the increasingly and more nuanced differentiation of life phases, often anchored around age. Age becomes more central to how we think about ourselves and others. Age becomes more central to how opportunities are opened or closed, or how we organize social institutions. So on the one hand, age is becoming more salient. On the other hand, there's lots of evidence that also shows that age is becoming more irrelevant in some ways, that longer lives and an increasing health span have led to some resistance around age, have led to efforts around anti-aging, have led to a quest to become ageless when we diminish or we deny how age might matter as a predictor or determinant of anything, let alone of being old, if we allow ourselves to say that we become old today. So these are all important considerations for how the life course has changed and for the kinds of opportunities and expectations we have in each of these periods. So let me say just a couple of things about this, what we call the idealized life course in the schooled society. So in the report, we contrast the schooled society with the learning society, which is a vision we have for the future. A lot of what we're going to be opening a conversation about today is how do we start to kind of break down this more rigid, fixed, linear life that emerged in the in the last century in connection with the school society, or we call it the credentialed, others have called it credentialed societies, where we were focused on learning, and the evolution of schools and the quest for credentials was all central to that model of life. But really, it's a model of life that's centered in work more than schools per se, because in this model, schools are seen as preparation for work, and retirement is seen as an exit from it. And it's tangled up, as I said, in these ideas about different phases of life. Higher education today is, in some ways, viewed as a place to get ready for adulthood. Young people are in some ways protected from adult responsibilities until they leave school. And in fact, to be out of school is in many ways to be fully adult. And some might argue that at the other end, retirement from work or the full embrace of leisure also may leave some older people feeling or being treated as if they're no longer fully adult. But as I noted, this model assigns roles to specific ages. So it also creates age constraints, it creates age discrimination, and it creates age segregation. And as I also mentioned earlier, urbanization and industrialization also drove the separation of learning, work, and family as spheres. And so again, this brought some benefits, but it also brought some problems. A very gendered life course attached to very gendered roles. His life and her life look quite different and had different opportunity structures. The same was true of class divisions. And while the boundaries, as we just saw, between some of these boxes are eroding, again, this model still lives in social expectations. It lives in our policies and it lives in our institutions. And the good news is that because so much of this model is human-made, it can also be reworked through civic architecture. And if there's political will, and we talk about that in the report. And the upheaval that we're experiencing in the US in this political moment is a critical chance to rethink and rebuild lives for a new century. And that's sort of what we're up to here. In the report, we talk about this idealized life course then for the Learning Society. I think this is the schematic we use there to depict a more flexible life course, but you can see it's in some ways more episodic. Learning is extended across all ages and infused into all spheres. So let me just make a couple more points, and then we'll move on to Gloria. But I want to say a little bit more about some of the assumptions that would be under this more flexible model of the life course. One is that flexibility isn't just about finding more time to allocate for learning through adult life. We need more time to allocate toward lots of things, and we have more time to allocate toward lots of things. But in learning societies, flexibility of this flexible life course is really essential to think about how opportunities for learning could be infused into every life phase and every kind of sphere. In a truly flexible life course, education doesn't end with youth. Young people are encouraged to expect lifelong learning. They're encouraged to expect multiple careers, to have the ability to move fluidly between periods that are focused on work or learning or caring for others. So instead of a static linear path, life becomes more episodic, as I said, and there are going to be many more transitions and also many more opportunities for self-development, one would hope. Learning also isn't just confined to schools. And in a learning society, education would be embedded in workplaces, in online platforms, even in entertainment. Employers would see workplaces as hubs for ongoing talent development. Government policies would blend education and labor, recognizing that resilient workforce really depends on the possibility of continuous learning. Legacy schools and land-grant institutions could become centers for aggregating and delivering learning opportunities at every age. Historically, though, inflexibility has not been seen as a problem of everyone. It's been seen as a problem mainly for women, for caregivers, and for people from disadvantaged groups. So for real change, flexibility needs to be seen as a broader social and political need that benefits everybody. Flexibility, of course, can mean many things. It could mean holding focused roles at different times, say focusing exclusively on learning in a later period, or maybe better juggling multiple roles at once. So how to, in the middle of life, say, focus on learning alongside deep responsibilities related to work and family and other activities. So there are going to be lots of opportunities for flexibility as I see it. With longer lives, we can imagine new ways to budget time in adulthood. We can imagine fresh possibilities for work in the middle and later years, alternative paths into retirement, flex time policies, new forms, alternative credentials. And we can also imagine that we have to confront some very real obstacles, things that make achieving flexibility in life hard. Our current pension and Social Security rules, for example, really reinforce that linear life. Health insurance being tied to having a full-time job or being partnered or married to somebody who can give it to you. Restrictive scholarship and financial aid policies say that require full-time study. Education and occupational tracking, age biases. Young people feel age bias too, not just older people. The squeeze that people feel in midlife, I guess I just noted a moment ago, around the pileup of lots of responsibilities that would make the pursuit of learning challenging. So these are just some small windows into what become some big barriers to also achieving flexibility. And with that, I guess, Gloria, I'll turn it over to you.
And could you unshare your screen too? Thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. Come on in, Gloria. Um, turn on your video and
Sorry, I'm getting a can't turn it on alert message.
Oh no.
uh-oh, interesting. Maybe I can turn it on for you.
Yes, I think one of you. Here we go.
You got it? There you go. She
Thank you
exists.
all.
Hi, Gloria.
Hello, Rick. Hello, Mitchell. How are you today? So great to be
Great.
here. Thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in this important conversation. I'm Gloria Mwase. I'm the Senior Vice President for Research and Impact at CALE, which is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. And for those of you who are not familiar with CALE, we work with a wide range of stakeholders, employers, post-secondary institutions of all types, workforce boards, nonprofit organizations, funders, and other mission-aligned organizations to advance adult learners to career success. And these adult learners are typically described as being 25 years and older. They usually have family or caregiving responsibilities. They can be spouses and have children or older family members they are caring for. And these adult learners are often seeking additional education and skills development later in life to support advancement in a career field or changes to another career. But ultimately, what they're seeking is a higher quality of life for themselves and their families. In other words, our adult learners are the poster children for the need for flexibility in the life course and the promise of the Learning Society to bring this greater flexibility to their educational and career pursuits. So delighted to be talking about a little bit about our experience working with them and how it relates to some of the points that Rick made to help advance this conversation. So based on CALE's experience, I want to just affirm a lot of what Rick has said and what we already are seeing in the field towards this greater flexibility, acknowledging the barriers that he already mentioned. And I'll just make 3 high-level points, and then we'll pull Mitchell into this conversation and all of you as well. Anxious to get to some of the questions you have, as well as some of the points I already see emerging in the chat. So please continue to use that and join the conversation. So my first point is that adult learners are driving some of the flexibility we're already seeing in the education and training arena. And many adult learners are trying to increase their education, but they want flexibility to help them balance better the education, work, and family life responsibilities that they're carrying. As a result, we're seeing a proliferation of online programs, with 98% of higher education institutions reporting that they have at least one fully online program. This is in 2024 and up from 77% in 2019. So we know that, of course, that COVID helped to drive some of that, but the fact that these programs still remain is an indication of the value that these institutions see in adding this flexibility for adult learners. At the same time, many adult learners are seeking to gain skills they need in shorter time frames. And so we're seeing an increase in short-term non-degree credentials that help learners gain skills fast. Everything from certificates, industry-based certificates, micro-credentials, boot camps, badges. All of these strategies are being adopted by post-secondary institutions and other organizations, again, as a way of maximizing that flexibility, a post-secondary degree not being the only course. Of course, there's some work we all have to do to ensure quality online learning and also to help adult learners identify and pursue credentials that have a strong labor market value. So this proliferation has made that a much harder opportunity to kind of sort through for adult learners and for employers who don't really know how to interpret all of these various different educational alternatives and the credentials they produce. But still, I think these are steps in the right direction in terms of increasing flexibility and increasing the capacity for adult learners to manage multiple commitments. We also need to continue to increase flexibility and de-risk these alternative choices so that they can meet today's needs without limiting opportunities for tomorrow. So I think that a question I want to stick a pin in and come back to later in our discussion, because I think there are ways that that's already starting to happen and a lot more ways that it needs to happen to enhance the flexibility that Rick was talking about. So the first point is we need ongoing flexibility in the learning enterprise, wherever that's happening. Secondly, I think we really want to note that managing the competing demands of work, education, and family life takes an increasing toll on our adult learners. And this toll is physical, mental, social, and financial, and greater flexibility can help address all of these. And I'll just use one example. Kel did some research on how adult learners pay for college and asked if they'd ever stopped out of their educational journey for any reason. And this need to take a pause, as we call it, is a substantial issue for adult learners juggling multiple responsibilities, even when they're highly motivated to get to the goal of getting that degree. And what we found was that for more than 75% of the respondents, the primary reason for a pause had to do with financial obligations, not their ability to tackle college, which is often what folks think, or to do well in college, but they couldn't afford to pay any longer, or they needed to find or save more money to continue their education so that they can complete their degree. And so what that says is that we certainly need greater flexibility in helping to pay for additional learning. And I don't mean just post-secondary education. I started with that example. But as we think about the learning society more broadly, how are we going to help learners pay for the learning, or for important services that compete with funds they could use to pay for learning, like paying for care work? And then another important reason why adult learners may stop out is while they're highly motivated to succeed and to complete, they're exhausted. And I think we need to expand our definition of care work in the learning society to include self-care, and the flexibility that's needed to achieve that. We all know, for instance, that we have a challenge around, taking vacations. It's just one small example in this country. How many vacation hours get left on the table by workers? And there are, of course, a segment of our workforce that doesn't get much of an option in terms of vacation in the first place. So that self-care option, a little time for rest, is not even available to them. And then for those who may have that available to them, work culture that emphasizes, continuing to work and working hard and not taking breaks might make those less likely to be taken as well. And so we have a nation of really exhausted adult learners and workers who are again trying to add work and education and family responsibilities and personal care all together, and it's exhausting. And one of my future fellows colleagues, Matt Greenfield, often said that adults shouldn't have to make a heroic effort to get an education. And we know this is still too often the case, and it's still going to be the case in the learning society unless we come up with some solutions that ensure that learners can take care of themselves and take care of others and have the flexibility to do so. So flexibility for self-care and care work in the learning economy is my second point. And then finally, I'll just end with the important role that employers play in expanding flexibility in their workplaces related to the learning society, including where employees work, how employees work, and how they learn while they're working. And these issues are still too often disconnected from each other and too inflexible, though we're seeing changes in this space as well. I think the promise of remote work and flexible scheduling are just a couple of examples of this. And I've been following with fascination the whole remote work experiment that started in COVID and the push back and push forward of that approach after COVID. Some as employer organizations are trying to figure out what is the best approach to helping them engage workers, retain workers, and help their workers to be the most productive they can be. I do think that we have a lot more work to do there in making the case for greater flexibility around where and how people work. And also a big component of this, and you noted this in your discussion about barriers, Rick, is the vital role of addressing work culture issues and especially addressing middle manager capacity building and training around these issues so that they see greater flexibility around work, around learning, around personal and family care as being essential things that their workers need to address, and that they build this into how they are organizing and managing work within their workplaces. And so, for example, longer lives means the opportunity for longer work lives if that's what folks want to do. And so, but that work can't look the same as it may have looked earlier in the life course. And so I think employers, especially as we're hitting the period of time where we have more workers who are nearing retirement age. Some are retiring, others are retiring to go into encore careers or new opportunities. And employers are constantly seeking to find and engage and retain workers to fill the skill gaps. Employers at both senior leaders and middle managers really have to think about how work needs to change to maximize the contributions of diverse employees across the life course if they're going to keep these workers within their organization. So these are some really important issues. I'm excited to be talking about them with you. And so why don't we jump right in? Mitchell, why don't you join us? And audience, we'd love to know your comments and questions as we go along as well. So please join us in this conversation.
Great
Great.
comments, Gloria.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'll just add a couple of things and then we'll open it up here. There's a couple cool questions in the chat already. I want to emphasize, our conversations so far with this work over the last year, have been very optimistic. I mean, we see these technological changes and the gift of longer lives as kind of huge opportunities to kind of remake the life course in ways that are a lot kinder to people over the course of their lives. And as I was listening, I was thinking, there were a lot of rigidities that were baked into the 20th century life course that really forced people to make hard choices or even impossible choices between, caring for loved ones or investing in themselves. And we see this as a moment to get rid of, to not get rid of, to reduce some of those tensions. And while we share a lot of the optimism of that's happening in the future of work and learning space, I personally feel like, great, all sorts of opportunities to learn, but like, who's going to take care of my kids? Who's going to pay the bills? Is my employer going to, in fact, let me, take the time that I need to make investments in myself? So, one of the things that's been a theme of all the work so far is as we take advantage of new technologies and platforms, let's not forget that just adding technologies and platforms to already crowded and complicated lives, right, is not going to get us the human capital investment that we need. So, I think that's and I think Gloria's comments sort of made that really clear. John Skrentny from San Diego is on the line, and he had this really interesting point about, in a sense of sort of like, why did it take us so long? In other words, like, what's pushing against these kinds of changes? Why, we've been asking working mothers in particular, for example, right, to make hard choices for a really long time. So, how could we sort of think about why that prior life course and all of its constraints has been so durable? Um, Either of you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I'm sure Rick will add as well. So one thing has to do with the expansion of the labor market. So when there's a strong need for workers, with especially with skilled workers, and that supply is in abundance, then the flexibility around change, both at the employer level, but also even around institutions that are preparing individuals for the workforce, is less. But we are in a different spot right now in this country, and I don't think we've quite recognized the need to change our approaches aligned with that reality. And that is that the baby boom is retiring, and that whole generation, our workforce, the generations of workforce are smaller going forward. Um,
Mhm.
our our um, our younger generations have diverse viewpoints about what defines quality life, that don't necessarily mean go straight to college and go straight into a career, as the school society version of the life course has outlined. And so that much more nuanced and differentiated life course graphic that Rick showed is becoming the reality across the life course. And employers, if
Mhm.
they want to retain older workers who have skills and contributions yet to make, as well as engage younger workers who are looking at a whole different balance in their quality of life, have got to change the way we think about engaging, employing, and helping those workers to learn.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think, this is an opportunity for all of us to think about how we can do this differently, more efficiently, and more effectively, given those realities.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say, as I was alluding to in my comments, I do think this particular moment in the history of our nation is an important one. Many of the legacy institutions and policies and programs that we've long known are being dismantled. We need to come together to create a vision for what replaces what's being taken down. And I do think there's something about this moment. But John, I'm with you. I've been writing about these things for 30 years. It's like, come on already.
Mhm.
But Gloria alluded to some really intractable challenges. I mean, people don't want to give up income and security for more time necessarily, especially if it means that they're risking their long-term financial stability. Gloria mentioned cultural attitudes, like the emphasis on hard work and a steady job, and taking time away from work is somehow equated with being less valuable or even irresponsible. Like, that's a problem. It's a problem when people want and need to take family leave, but feel stigma in using something they have the right to use. And so some of the stigma around supports, I think some of what we're talking about, the flexibility is gained is somehow seen as social welfare, and it makes it contentious. Um, And Gloria mentioned, organizational resistance, especially managers and supervisors on the ground. It complicates operations. It undermines predictability in organizations. That's hard in the question of who pays for it. These are all things that we've got to come around. And I think these have been some intractable barriers that have really gotten in the way of progress. But I think that's why I was underscoring the point that flexibility has to be understood as something that's good for all of us. We know in the Nordic countries, for example, when paternal leave is forced, it has strong effects on children and on men themselves, fathers themselves. So I do think that a lot of this is also a set of cultural expectations that really get in the way from moving this forward, but the time is now.
Timothy makes from Arkansas makes a good point. We have all sorts of new technologies, but they really require sort of a baseline infrastructure capacity. People need to have access to computers and broadband internet, and that's those are utilities that can't be presumed. And I absolutely agree. I mean, one good example of change that is possible in the second Obama administration, a group of business leaders and philanthropists organized around a project called Education Superhighway that I just put in the chat, which in many ways quietly, but very powerfully, made sure that there was broadband internet access in the vast majority of K-12 schools in the United States. We may need something similar. In fact, we may well need something similar like that, right? If we're going to build a learning society, if we're going to expect and encourage people to invest in themselves in new ways over the arc of longer careers, then, what sort of tech conditions would we need to create to make that happen? And so, I think that's really important. If for relatively well-off people, it's sort of I'm a relatively well-off person. I tend to think of Google as kind of a free public utility. Of course, it's not. It's a business that's making money off of every time I click and interact with it, right? And of course, there are large entry fees, and I need to have a bunch of capacity in order to do that. So I think that's a really powerful point. It's also Antje Garjan from Germany made an interesting point. She says, in my opinion, we need a partnership between employees, employers, and the policymakers to enable and finance more flexibility. The responsibility should not be shouldered by one party alone. Do we have enough awareness of this? And how are you guys thinking about, um, how this needs to be a joint venture?
I think we're going to see more. I think we are seeing more of this happening, Mitchell, as employers are confronting the talent challenges that they have.
Hmm.
And what we
Hmm.
what we need to do more of is help them understand the options that are available to them because they go to the
Hmm.
solutions that they know. They're a little bit more hesitant on some solutions that are emerging that they haven't been made clear to them. And I just talk about like skills-based hiring and
Hmm.
all of those kinds of things all have great promise, but have a translation problem right now in terms of helping employers understand how to operationalize these approaches at scale to allow them to engage employees that they need in very straightforward and efficient ways. And so I think that's still evolving. The
Hmm.
other point, though, I think back to your point about the technology, and it's certainly true that a digital divide exists in this country as it relates to access to technology, access to internet. But, a lot of us have this. I don't know if you can see this with my Zoom background, but I'm holding up I have an iPhone. We all have a smartphone, most of us. And somebody was talking about I remember reading an article some time ago about how smartphones proliferate even in developing countries where people may not have other types of infrastructure, and they're actually utilized to help enhance education in a lot of different areas,
Hmm.
education. My point is this: people invest in technology that they think they need, and the phone is
Mhm.
one. And so, how do we start to think about it, developing learning that's accessible even on a simple phone?
Mhm.
That it
Mhm.
doesn't have to require a post-secondary institution. It doesn't require to sign up for something. It's learning that's available to all on topics we all need to know. And
Mhm.
as my colleague Matt Greenfield, who's one of our fellows, used to say, and it's a 10-minute game and you're learning something. And we know the gamification of learning is not new, but the scale of that and the recognition of that and the economics of that, for how do we help these folks who are working in that space see the Learning Society as a market they should be pursuing? And then
Mhm.
that enhances the opportunities for different types of learning beyond the classroom, whether that classroom is in person or virtual.
Amen. Rick.
I was just going to say a great point, Gloria. People also, going back to your de-risking, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to come around that. But people also invest in credentials that they think will help them. And the alternative credential space, which you mentioned as being so attractive to adult learners, is a space that we don't really have rigorous scientific evidence around. To like really we need to understand what the motivations of adult learners are for certain as they're oriented towards certain kinds of credentials, but um, we don't have enough rigorous evidence to know whether they actually offer gateways to opportunity and mobility. And I think that this is a space where we just need to learn a lot more.
Well,
Mhm.
and then also, I mean, the other thing that many of us talk about across the country too is, how would one do that, right? So, I mean, also a learning society would need to create some sort of, this sounds like some sort of mechanism for observing that over a long period of time, right? And I mean, that's another place in which I think the platform world that we live in is very promising, which is, we do have the capacity to do that. And a lot of the capacity isn't most of the capacity is in the private sector, right? So and there's tons of activity under experiments underway to figure out, what an observational infrastructure might look like. Jason Sisko's learning and education records, for example, projects underway at FredLens, Burning Glass Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, University of Michigan. I mean, there's a lot of efforts to try and do that. One of the one of the big and cool challenges is, yeah, what kind of federated capacity could we build that would enable people to know, like, yeah, in fact,
Right.
these kinds of investments pay off in these kinds of ways for these kinds of people, and those kinds of investments, right? So I think that's another
Oh
aspect of
yeah,
the sort
that's
of technical infrastructure that we would need to build somehow, um, to make these possibilities real. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Right.
And going back to Ancha's point, I mean, I think the a big message of our report is really about that this has to involve collaborations across every sector. I mean, this is not work done in isolation. The schools, employers, governments, civic
Hmm.
organizations. That a, 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 a grand vision about a new kind of life course with learning infused into every phase and every sphere is one that requires every sector to be engaged and to buy into uh, why there's a strong business case for it and why it's important. Well, Mitchell, you alluded to this before. If we hope to also create a more caring, nurturing society.
Hmm.
Mhm. And
So, yeah, go ahead, Gloria, please.
just building on Rick's points and also Ancha's question, Ancha is also one of our fellows. Um, I do think that we need some additional pilots around this approach, and I wonder if the Learning Society doesn't hit the ground at the regional level as you think about
Mm,
all the stakeholders that need to be engaged at some scale that is manageable as we try to figure out how this all comes together, as Rick just described. And it seems like bringing together regional stakeholders, many of whom are trying to collaborate already around workforce ecosystem issues to some degree, but really expanding that emphasis, bringing in the care community, bringing in more of the employer community, talent developers and HR folks who can help us think about this much more holistically than just train some folks to get a job. And here's the occupational pathway. So I'm intrigued by the how, and there are lots of important and emerging questions that have been framed in the Learning Society report. How do you measure learning? Who pays for it? The whole economics of learning. And so these are other kind of design principles um, within the larger report that we'll touch on in some other forum. So if you haven't signed up, please do to learn about those other aspects. That's an unsolicited advertisement. But nonetheless, I do
Nice
think
job,
that
Gloria.
And
I do think that we have to figure out how to actually develop some proof cases for
Mhm.
the concepts that we're talking about.
I'm going to give each of you a moment to say a final word, and while you prepare for that, I will put in a plug for our next forum, which is in 2 weeks from today. It's Kristen Harknett from University of California, San Francisco, with commentary from Stefanie DeLuca at Johns Hopkins, reporting on some very cool work that Kristen and the Shift Project team have done to really to observe differences across companies in the extent to which they enable learning opportunities for their employees, and some very canny research to reveal there are substantial differences in frontline work about about what firms can and do and don't do. To enable the kinds of learning opportunities that we've talked about. So, some more of those existence proofs coming up in a couple weeks. Rick, do you want to make a comment, and Gloria, if you like?
Sure. 2 points. A learning society and a longevity society require a human capital strategy that is not just front-loaded, but offers distributed opportunities for investment across all life stages. And two, learning and flexibility, duly combined, I
Mhm.
think are essential for any vision of personal or national prosperity.
Amen. Gloria?
And I'll just add to that the Learning Society is already underway and you have an opportunity to advance it right now. So here's the opportunity for you to take a look at within your own work organizations, whatever type of organization that might be, to explore what are the aspects of your work that can already begin to reflect the principles of the design principles of the Learning Society, or where are the low-hanging fruit to help you begin to make those shifts within your organization. So let's all take the reins where we can to begin to steer towards the Learning Society within our own spheres of influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you both, and thanks to the audience who lent an hour today. Come back and also stay tuned for other ways in which you could be involved. And if you have activities in your neck of the woods that you want to be sure that we know about, please do drop me a line, stevens4@stanford.edu. And there's also you can go right through the website as well. Don't be a stranger. We're trying to connect a bunch of cool activity that's underway all over the country. Thanks, everybody.